Welcome to TEAMER's first webinar of 2026 on quality management systems, specifically with TEAMER facilities in mind, but we have opened this up to the public as there will be general information that should be of use to anyone in the industry. And if you know TEAMER and you know a little bit about TEAMER if you're here, TEAMER is one of TEAMER's goals is advancing the marine energy industry. So this should be useful for you. Our presenter today is Jonathan Colby, founder and president of Streamwise Development. I'm going to let him do his own introduction, but I did want to let you know that there is a Q&A function available in Teams in the webinar today. And that's the best way that you'll be able to have your questions answered. So if you don't see it in your window, you might need to click that 3 little dots with more underneath it and find Q&A. You can also use the chat, but the Q&A is going to be better geared for getting your questions answered in the order they're received. TEAMER does have more workshops and webinars coming up this year, so I hope you will take a peek at the webinars and workshops page, which I will post in the chat shortly, including one in-person workshop that will be focused on deck ops and will even include a micro-credential for those who complete the workshop. More information to come soon, so take a look at that page once I post the link. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Jonathan Colby. Jonathan?
Hey, thanks, Aaron. Hello, everyone. Obviously, I'd like to thank Sam and the entire team at TEAMER for the opportunity to present to you today. As Aaron mentioned, I'm going to talk about quality management systems and TEAMER. I'd like to thank the leadership at TEAMER and the technical board. I'd like to thank the U.S. Department of Energy for their support of the TEAMER program. And I really appreciate all of you coming today and joining and your attention to my webinar. I do hope it's valuable, and I look forward to some questions that you may have. So I'll start with just my welcome and agenda. I'll start with a few minutes of sort of outline, introduction, and goals. I'll move into a summary of standards and quality management systems sort of at large. I'll then dive into some existing quality management standards. And nominally, these standards are the basis of a quality management system. And so there is a little nuance to the terminology. You have a quality management system that is usually based on a quality management standard. And I'll go through all this sort of in detail. And then I'll spend some time talking about the actual implementation of quality management systems or of a quality management system. I'll try to end with sufficient time for Q&A, and I've joined with my phone and online to try and track some of the Q&A in real time. So if there are questions that are particularly topical at a given moment, I'll do my best to respond to those in real time as best I can. So Jonathan Colby, I am the president and founder of Streamwise Development. At present, I'm serving as the chair of the ICRE system, which we'll talk about a little bit today, which focuses on certification. I also am currently the vice chair of IEC TC 114, which is the IEC body that develops standards for marine energy, and we'll talk about that today. Most of you probably know I was previously with Verdant for just over 15 years, serving most recently as their director of technology performance and led their Roosevelt Island Tidal Energy, or the Wright project, in New York City. My background is in engineering. I have a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering from the University of California at Berkeley. I have a master's from the College of Aerospace Engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology. The photo on the right is kind of particularly poignant, as this is work I was doing in 2000 on a helicopter rotor, or actually a VTOL, a vertical takeoff and landing rotor. But we were doing bubble visualization with lasers in a water tank. And it occurred to me that I've basically been spinning rotors underwater since 2000, which sort of puts me at like 25 plus years of spinning 3-bladed rotors in water. So I thought that was kind of a cool connection to the talk today. So as I pivot to why we're here today, I wanted to start with touching on the TEAMER goals. And I pulled these directly from the TEAMER website. I'm obviously not going to read them, but I highlighted a couple areas of interest. The first, one of the main TEAMER goals is access to testing infrastructure. And as I was reviewing this and thinking about this webinar, I caught on the word, and I italicized it, pre-certified facilities. And maybe for the TEAMER folks, in particular, and just the general audience, that term pre-certified is a little misleading. And we'll hear more about it. The word certified carries some significant connotations. And so I wondered if TEAMER and the group maybe thought that a word like pre-approved or vetted facilities was maybe a better term to consider in that first goal. The second goal, access to world-class expertise, I think is pretty clear. And then the third goal, that consistent testing protocols. When you read the words, in particular, the consistent testing protocols, to me, that really leads and touches on standards. And so I think my talk today, I hope, will sort of enlighten how we can get to consistent testing protocols, and in particular, quality management. And then similarly, that repository of marine energy performance data, I think that also really touches towards quality management. And I sort of also read the sort of serve the industry. I also think we want to note that it will benefit the industry. And I hope after today's webinar that the use of a quality management system, the implementation of a quality management system, and the standards that underpin those quality management systems will give you a sense of how they will facilitate a repository of marine energy performance data that will benefit or serve the industry as a whole. And so I thought that was a useful place to sort of level set as we get started. Now, the webinar itself, I have 5 key goals that I hope to get through and across today. The first is to just review international standardization generally. I'm going to summarize the value of a quality management system so you understand why I'm here today and why I'm hoping you'll consider some of my recommendations. I want to increase awareness of the range of quality management standards that are available from both ISO and this joint publication between ISO and IEC. And don't worry, I'm going to go through all these acronyms as we go along. One of my goals today is to encourage the adoption of a quality management system at TEAMER facilities. And for those that have them, I want to facilitate improvements in your existing quality management system. And so I hope I can accomplish all of these goals today. A couple notes. TEAMER is not requiring a quality management system as of now. However, in my opinion, this should be considered as a good practice. And so for those that don't have it, I hope you'll walk away today thinking, wow, we really should implement a quality management system. And as I note, in fact, most, if not many, or many, not most facilities likely have a quality management system in place already. And so for those that do, I hope I can encourage you and give you some practical tools to enhance your existing quality management system. And I also want to note that TEAMER has a very broad range of facilities that have been accepted to date that include both open water and non-open water facilities. And most people, I'm sure, are familiar with this, but the open water group is divided into open water capabilities and open water facilities, whereas the non-open water group is divided into multiple subcategories, including the newly formed commercialization category, expertise, laboratory and bench, numerical modeling and analysis, and tunnel, flume, tank, and basin. And the last bullet, this encompasses a very broad range of organizations. But as I trust you'll see today, there is an appropriate quality management system for each organization in every single one of these categories. And so for those of you that are thinking like, well, QMS, that doesn't really apply to my facility or my organization, I hope to dissuade you of that opinion. And I'll use my own example of Streamwise Development, a single member LLC, to show you that in fact, every organization can implement a quality management system. And there are significant benefits to doing so, no matter the size, scope, capabilities, et cetera, of your particular organization. So as Aaron touched on, we're asking you to please put your questions in the Q&A feature. Feel free to ask your questions during the webinar, and I will try my best to respond to them in real time. If I don't, and Aaron or Sam or somebody on the team, if you see somebody ask a question that's really topical, feel free to interrupt and say, Jonathan, there's a question if I'm not catching it. And then I have, as I showed in the agenda, I've tried to allocate about 20 or 25 minutes at the end for Q&A. So I'll make sure that we have time for that. So with that, I'm going to pivot to the core content of my webinar today, or my presentation. So first, I just want to make sure everybody understands who writes international standards. And so in general, there are three major international standard setting bodies. It's the IEC, or the International Electrotechnical Commission, which writes standards relating to electrotechnology. There's the ITU, or the International Telecommunication Union, which writes standards for telecommunications. And there's the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, which literally writes standards for everything else. And I was doing some research in preparation for this, and I was looking at what ISO writes standards for. They write standards for things as varied as quantum technologies, to footwear sizing and markings, to biodiversity. And so that everything else is literally everything else. If it's not electrotechnology and if it's not telecommunications, ISO writes standards for everything else. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those standards in particular and how they relate to quality management systems. So now that we know who writes those standards, I'm sure people are saying, why international standards? And as you'll learn, TC 114, which writes standards for marine energy, are developing technical specifications, which are precursors to these international standards. But the following why is true for both types of documents, whether international standard or technical specification. So first, these documents ensure that a common language and best practice approach is applied in all of our work. These documents enable direct technology comparison between different technologies in a given market. They are based on international expertise, and they use a consensus process to ensure that all the voices at the table are heard. These international standards or technical specifications facilitate global certification, and we'll talk about that today. And the one that usually is the biggest misconception, in my opinion, is that these documents support innovation and enable market access. And I hear from most people that standards stifle innovation. And I work very hard to convince people that it is, in fact, the opposite, that standards enable innovation. And the example that I usually give, and I like to give, is on a light bulb and the standardization of the light bulb socket. And with the light bulb socket becoming standardized, it enabled innovation. And the way I like to think about this is once the socket was standardized, we had incandescent light bulbs. And you had your 60-watt incandescent light bulb, standard socket. It could be sold globally. But that standardized socket enabled significant innovation, first to the 15-watt compact fluorescent light bulb, and to today's roughly 7-watt LED light bulb. If we had not standardized the socket, it's unlikely that this level of innovation and broad global adoption of these higher energy efficiency light bulbs would have been enabled. And sort of in this picture on the left, in the absence of a standard, you did not have a common platform upon which to innovate. And once the light bulb socket was standardized, it enabled innovation, and that innovation to be broadly accepted and used globally. And so if there's only one thing you take away today, I hope you'll take away that standards enable innovation, and the standardization of the light bulb socket is a very tangible example of innovation that was facilitated by global standardization. So the IEC, electrotechnology, I'm not really going to focus on this today. I think many of you have heard me talk about the IEC. We'll get back to this. But I thought the one that was important today was to talk about ISO, or the International Organization for Standardization. It was formed in 1946, roughly 40 years after the IEC was formed. At the time when it came into existence, it had 67 technical committees. Today, there's over 300 technical committees in ISO. And I sort of touched on, they cover an enormous range. And if you're ever bored, you can look up the ISO list of technical committees and you will be astonished at the range of standards that ISO covers. I think the second key bullet is it develops voluntary, consensus-based, market-relevant international standards that support innovation and provide solutions to global challenges. And so the IEC and ISO are the two organizations that I'm going to focus on today. So those are the standards writing bodies. Now, as we pivot to the quality management system, or QMS, part of this, there is the American Society for Quality. I won't read everything on these slides. You'll have these slides after we're done, and you'll have a recording of this webinar. But I thought the bottom bullet, which I've quoted, is sort of most important, and is that the ISO 9001 series is the ISO 9001 standard, is the most recognized and implemented quality management system standard in the world. And ISO 9001 specifies the requirement for a quality management system that organizations can use to develop their own programs. And today I'm going to go more in depth in ISO 9001 and some other quality management standards that I hope TEAMER facilities will consider utilizing as they either implement a quality management system or enhance their existing quality management system. And so I thought it was also important to sort of start at the beginning. What is a quality management system? And so ISO sets out basically 7 quality management principles. And I'll go through them. First is customer focus. Second is leadership. Second is engagement of people, and that's in particular the staff of your organization. The fourth is to implement and develop a process-based approach to quality management. The fifth, which we'll talk about again, is a continuous improvement process that is implemented through your quality management system. It is based on an evidence-based decision-making process, and there's a strong component that's relationship management. And so I hope this helps sort of set what the guiding principles of a quality management system are, and we'll go through this in more detail today. And so hopefully I've set who the standards bodies are, IEC and ISO, what is a quality management system, what are some of the fundamental principles of a quality management system, and then the question I would hopefully think that people are asking is, why would I implement a quality management system? And so I've tried to provide a few reasons, and I note among many, but a few reasons to implement a quality management system is that it allows you to coordinate and direct your organizational activities to meet both customer and regulatory requirements. Now, in marine, we have less of the formal regulatory requirements, but we do, as I think all TEAMER facilities would know, have quite a few customer requirements. And so a QMS can really help coordinate and direct activities to meet those customer requirements. Quality management systems focus and encourage the improvement of your effectiveness and efficiency on a continuous basis. And we'll come back and we'll talk about this throughout the slides today. The implementation of a quality management system inherently can help prevent mistakes and errors, which is critical for the success of any organization. And the implementation of a quality management system can really maximize value to the customer. And as a TEAMER facility, I would think that your partner, the applicant, is a customer. And so as a facility, I would think that you would be looking to maximize value to your customer, or in this case, the applicant to the TEAMER facility. And as an organization, if you look outside of the TEAMER program, I think these first 4 bullets are really relevant to your organization as a sort of, writ large. Now, within the TEAMER program, I include 2 additional bullets. I believe that implementing a QMS within TEAMER facilities can help ensure that the Department of Energy sees a return on their investment. And again, this is specifically within TEAMER, and I will touch more on this. But I also believe that the implementation of a quality management system will help enhance the transferability of TEAMER outcomes. And I believe personally that this touches back on one of the goals of TEAMER, where it brings value or benefit to the industry writ large. And if the results of individual TEAMER RFTS awards are more transferable and have a higher level of quality, it will ensure that those results can be shared and utilized by the industry at large. And I do think that's a really important reason of why TEAMER facilities in particular should consider adopting and implementing or enhancing a quality management system. And so why, and then sort of what is the value? And again, here are a few reasons among many. I believe that the value of a QMS is that it can reduce potential liability within your organization. And for me, this touches back on the previous slide, the bullet about reducing mistakes and errors. And if you can reduce mistakes and errors in the work you're doing, you can reduce potential liabilities moving forward. The value of implementing a QMS as a TEAMER facility will also allow you to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. And so the stronger your quality management system is, the more of a differentiation you have in the marketplace and something you can proactively market to customers, TEAMER applicants, and your broader sort of network. Now, a QMS, or quality management system, can also enable new business. I, from experience, know that certain equipment that is implemented must be tested or calibrated at an ISO IEC 17025 accredited test facility. Excuse me. Now, we're going to go through what that means later in the slide deck, but the more rigorous and robust your quality management system, you can actually open up entirely new markets for your organization where ISO 17025 accreditation is mandatory. And then finally, sort of generically, having a robust quality management system can enhance credibility with your customers. And I think this is an important aspect for all organizations, including my own. Now, as a final note, which I am going to talk about later, if your organization is participating or wishes to participate within a global conformity assessment system, such as the IECRE, and I will go through more detail of what the IECRE is, it's worth noting that a quality management system is mandatory for acceptance into this system. And that's true for all global conformity assessment systems. And so if you have visions of operating globally and operating in a global certification or conformity assessment system, quality management systems are mandatory. And so this would be a real driver and a real value of implementing such a system. And once you're in those systems, the deliverables that you issue will be recognized globally. And so as you sort of look above, as you talk about market differentiation or enabling new business, once you're inside of a global conformity assessment system, you now open your facility, whether it's a certification body, a test laboratory, a calibration lab, an inspection body, you open your business and your organization to business globally, because the reports you issue, the certificates you issue, the inspection reports you issue become a global deliverable. So I hope this shows there is real value to an organization, a lab, a certification body, any organization, to having a rigorous quality management system as a part of your organizational ethos, if you will. So with that, I'm going to pivot to what are quality management standards. I'm pretty much right on time for what I hope to talk about, the sort of why and who and the justification for the rest of this topic. So I'm going to now talk about sort of the most famous and most well-known set of quality management standards. And so that set of standards is the ISO 9000 series of standards. And what I think most everyone would have heard of is the ISO 9001, which is a one standard in the ISO 9000 series of standards. And I've put in bold, in particular underlined, the parts I think are most relevant that I hope you take out of this, is that ISO 9001 sets out the criteria for a quality management system and is the only standard in the family that can be certified to, although it's not a requirement. And again, this goes back to my TEAMER goals. TEAMER goals use the word pre-certified. And so as you go through this for the TEAMER team, I would ask you to think about the use of that terminology, pre-certified, and maybe consider changing that to something like pre-qualified or vetted. And now the next sentence, which I underlined, it can be used by any organization, large or small, regardless of its field of activity. And so again, I hope this shows that this is not just for big organizations or just for test laboratories. This is for every single facility in the TEAMER network, every organization that's listening, and all fields of activity within the TEAMER network. Now, the last one, I'm only going to read the bolded part. Using ISO 9001 helps ensure that customers get consistent, good quality products and services. And I underline services, which in turn brings many business benefits. And again, none of the TEAMER facilities are issuing or are producing products, but I believe all of them are delivering services. And I thought it was important to note that ISO 9001 is focused not only on product quality, but on the quality of services that are being delivered. And I do hope this shows that my talk today is relevant to every single organization within the TEAMER network, as well as anyone else that's joining us today. So what is the ISO 9000 series of standards? It's published by a technical committee of ISO. I give them there. It is 4 standards. The 9000 is fundamentals and vocabulary. The 9001 is the most famous, which are the requirements for a quality management system. The 9002 gives you some guidelines, and then 9004 gives you additional guidance to achieve sustained success. So again, this is a series of standards where 9001 is the most famous of those in the series. Now, I thought this would be relevant. The ISO 9000 was published in 2015. I give a link here that would allow you to see a preview of the publicly available portions of the standard. And for your information, that standard is $321 to purchase from ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute, and that's the non-member price. So if your organization were a member of ANSI, it is significantly discounted, but for non-members, that's how much it costs to buy that standard. The ISO 9001 was also published in 2015. That's the key requirement standard, and that standard is available for $255 to purchase from ANSI. Now, I think it's important to note that the ISO 9001 is currently out for maintenance and revision. The new version of 9001 is anticipated to be published this year. So shortly, 9001 2026 will be published. And so for those that are thinking about buying this standard or considering buying it, the reality is you don't want to buy a standard that's out of date. And so I just wanted to give you all fair warning and sort of notice that a new edition of ISO 9001 is expected to be published later this year. So just take that into consideration. There will be a 2026 publication of ISO 9001. Now, I thought it'd be useful for those that have never seen ISO 9001 to show the table of contents. And this is publicly available information. You can get it from the links on the previous slide, but I thought it would be useful for you all to just see it right here. Normal sort of standards type structure, scope, normative references, terms and definitions. And then you get into what I would consider the meat of the standard. The three in bold are the ones that I thought would be useful to go into a slightly deeper dive on. So in the next couple slides, I will go through some of the sub-clauses of Clause 6, which is on planning, Clause 9 on performance evaluation, and then Clause 10 on improvement. There are 2 annexes, and then there's a bibliography. And again, you can find this table of contents in a publicly available format through the links I provided. And so again, for those that maybe haven't seen 9001, maybe don't know exactly what it talks about, I wanted to give a couple relevant subclauses so you could see the type of content that is given in guidance like 9001. And again, this is a standard that gives guidance on how to implement a quality management system and what should be in a quality management system. So Clause 6 on planning. As a part of your quality management system, the standard gives guidance on the actions you as an organization should take to address risks and opportunities. It gives guidance on how to set quality objectives and plans to achieve those quality objectives. And then it gives guidance or recommendations on the planning of changes within your organization over time. Then in Clause 9, it talks about performance evaluation. How do you evaluate your performance? So it gives guidance and instruction on the monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation of the work you're doing on quality management. It sets requirements for internal audits and how you manage internal audits, as well as guidance and requirements on management review as a part of your organizational quality management. And then Clause 10, which I think is quite important and we'll see over and over again, is about improvement. And part of a quality management system is the continual improvement of your organization's quality and its own quality management system. And I'll talk more about this as we go along. But so there's a general section or subsection on improvement. There are specific requirements and guidance on how to manage nonconformity, aka failures, if you will, and corrective actions that will be taken based on those nonconformities, and as well as guidance on how to ensure continual improvement within your quality management system. And so I hope this is helpful to sort of understand the types of requirements that ISO 9001 sets out for how an organization establishes, maintains, and continually improves their quality management system, and by association, the quality of the product or service that organization offers. Now, there are more standards in quality management, and I thought I would touch this one quite lightly. There is also the ISO 10000 series of standards, and this is a series of standards comprised primarily of guidelines for customer satisfaction, as well as guidelines for other aspects of quality management. I've given you a link that can take you to the full suite of the 10,000 series, which go from 10,001 through 10,020. I picked out just a couple relevant examples. The 10,006 is on guidelines for quality management in projects. The 10 is on guidance to understand, evaluate, and improve organizational quality culture. The 10,012 is on requirements for measurement processes and measuring equipment. And then 15 is on guidelines for competent management and people development. And so for those that really want to take ISO 9001 to the next level, there's the suite of 10,000 series, which can really help you further improve your quality management system, but also the focus on customer satisfaction as it comes to your quality and your quality management. Now, the next suite of quality management standards, which I think are the most relevant for TEAMER facilities, and we'll come back to later, are the 17,000 series of standards. And this is a series of standards that are developed jointly between ISO and IEC, which is why I wanted to introduce both of those organizations up front. And this is published by a Policy Development Committee on Conformity Assessment. And if I haven't reiterated, conformity assessment is another way of saying certification. And so this is a way of looking at third-party verification of compliance to standards. And again, we'll talk more about that later. And so this group develops international standards and other documents related to conformity assessment, which again is a third-party verification of compliance to standards. Now, this suite of standards is quite large, quite robust. It's 40 documents in total. It's numbered 17,000 through 1767. They also have a guide, 68. And in total, this suite of standards is known as the toolbox. And as they say, a picture tells 1,000 words. Now, obviously, I don't expect everyone to memorize or know all of this, but this is the suite of ISO IEC 17,000 standards series. And there are 3 in particular that are relevant for TEAMER facilities and for people listening with us today. The first is on inspection bodies, which is 17,020. And so this gives guidance on quality management for bodies that conduct inspection-related activities. So that's in the sort of middle center. In the lower left, there's the ISO 17025, which gives very specific and detailed guidance on the requirements for testing and calibration laboratories. Oh, it's funny, the first time I noticed there's a typo in their own chart. Anyways, and then on the bottom right, there are a suite of standards that relate to products, processes, and services. And this is the ISO 17065 and ISO 17067 standards. And so I'm going to go through 2 of these in particular now, which are the 17025 for testing and calibration laboratories, and the 17065, which are for certification bodies. And I think these standards in particular have a number of implications for the TEAMER facilities and the future considerations of TEAMER as a program and both testing and certification bodies that are participating, as well as any service provider within the TEAMER network. So to summarize, the ISO IEC 17,000 series, that's the guidance for conformity assessment bodies. And I list a number of those key standards here. It's what I showed in the previous slide: 17020 for inspections, 17025 for testing, 17065 for bodies that are certifying products, processes, and services. And so there are many testing facilities inside the TEAMER network. And so for those test facilities, I think it's important that you know some of the details of the subclauses of what 17025 calls out from a quality management standard perspective. And so you can see here the numbers are non-sequential because I've only called out a few of what I consider the key subclauses that would be relevant, at least from a 50,000 or 30,000 foot perspective. So in clause 6, the 17025 standard calls out some resources requirements. And so that would be things like your personnel, what's required of those personnel. It calls out things like the facilities and the environmental conditions you maintain at your facilities, and then how you maintain and the resources required to maintain your equipment. Then there are some process requirements. And I think this is very important from a testing perspective within TEAMER. It calls out requirements and guidance for how you handle test or calibration items, meaning when an item comes into your facility to be tested or calibrated, how do you handle that item? Now, the next one, 7.6, I think is incredibly important from a value to the industry. which is that the 17025 gives very specific guidance on how you evaluate measurement uncertainty. And as I trust all the test facilities know, how you evaluate and report uncertainty is a critical part of the testing process. And then it does give guidance also in 7.8 about the reporting of the results of testing or the results of calibration. And then as you look at a bit bigger picture in terms of the management system of your organization, the standard gives quite specific guidance on how you control records, what actions you take to address risk and those opportunities that are associated, or the yin to the yang of risk, and then how you implement and maintain that constant improvement within your quality management system. So I hope for those test facilities that are with us, this is a useful summary of how the 17025 calls out some very specific topics that I'm guessing are relevant to your organization and how you operate as a test facility. Now, as we pivot to some of the expertise type facilities, I wanted to highlight some of the clauses around 17065, which is for certification bodies. And I know that the TEAMER facilities do include certification bodies, but I think these would be relevant for most of the expertise type categories. Now, this document gives guidance on, again, the process requirements. So how do you evaluate a request for certification or a request for expertise? How do you make those decisions around certifying a product, process, or service? What type of surveillance is necessary around a product, process, or service that has been certified? And then guidance on how you terminate, reduce, suspend, or withdraw a certificate that may have been issued against a standard for a process, product, or service. And similarly, there are management system requirements. This includes control of documents, control of records, what kind of internal audits do you do, and how do you manage corrective actions. And the last thing I'll say for both of these two last slides, this one and the previous, although not shown here, these are additive if you have 9001. 9001 will allow you to cover most of what's in these standards, and then these will just cover what's missing from 9001. If you do not adhere to 9001, then the standard is self-standing in that if you comply with all of the clauses of this standard, you will be accredited, and we'll get to that. So if you come in with 9001, then 17065 is additive. If you don't carry any kind of 9001 compliance, 17065 and 17025 can be used as standalone standards to bring your quality management up to this level. So with that, I'm going to pivot. I lost my Q&A feature. I can try and pivot really quickly and see if I can see that. Okay, I don't see any Q&As yet. All right, I do see some chats. Q&A was not available.
I think we're having some trouble with the Q&A feature.
Yeah, Aaron.
We're having a little trouble with the Q&A feature, so we might have to use chat.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any yet in the chat. I'm not sure if I take that as a good sign or a bad sign, but I will pivot back in a moment and check on that. So that is the first 2/3 of what I wanted to talk about today. So the first third was who writes the standards, what is a quality management system, why implement one, what's the value of implementing one. Then my second third of the presentation was what are those quality management standards? And I ran through a summary of ISO 9000 series, ISO 10000 series, and the ISO 17000 series. And so now for the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'd like to talk specifically about implementing a quality management system at your organization. And so that's the slide you're seeing here now. And as I put this together and as I think about quality management, I see 4 levels of quality management systems. And so those are outlined here. I'm going to talk about 3 and 4 in particular in the next few slides. And then I'm going to end with a discussion about how Streamwise Development implements a quality management system. So the first, and these are going in order of complexity, is what I would call an in-house development. And so that is an organization establishes a quality management system. Full stop. Now, as I've noted, ideally, as an organization develops their own in-house quality management system, they would select parts or all, but we're going to get to that in 2. They would select parts of an existing quality management standard or a suite of such standards. And so organization A could choose to implement portions, parts, bits of existing quality management standards as they saw fit. And so that would be what I consider to be an in-house developed quality management system. Then the next level of complexity or sort of rigor would be the full first-party application of a given standard. And that, as I state, is where an organization states compliance with a relevant ISO or ISO-IEC quality management standard in its entirety. So organization B says, we comply with ISO 9001 in its entirety. And so this is a slightly higher level of implementation than item 1, where you've only selected parts of it, but it's not as rigorous as steps 3 and step 4, which I'll go through. And so again, this is where an organization independently first party states compliance with the relevant standard in its entirety. Another eighth party verifies compliance to that standard in question. And so in this case, I've given a couple examples or one example. So for in the case of the 17,000 series, should that be the standard that you're looking for a third party to verify, you also need to include a technical standard in scope. And so I wanted to give a very relevant example, and real world example is the National Laboratory of the Rockies today carries an A2LA, and I'm going to go through what that stands for, accreditation, ISO IEC 17025 with a scope and IEC TS 62600-3 mechanical loads, as well as 3 other technical specifications. And so to put this into more sort of layperson's terminology, the National Lab of the Rockies, NLR, states that they comply with ISO 17025 in its entirety. So that's part 2, the second example. But then they have had a national body, which in this case is the American Association for Laboratory Accreditation, A2LA, has come in as an independent third party and verified that NLR is indeed compliant with all of the clauses in 17025 and that they have the technical competence to do mechanical loads measurements for marine energy as written in IEC TS 62600-3, titled Mechanical Loads. Now, again, we'll go through this in a little bit more detail, but I provided a link so you can see the A2LA accreditation that NLR carries, and you can see the other standards within their technical scope covered by their accreditation. And so this accreditation at the national level is the sort of third level of rigor in adopting and implementing a quality management system. Now, the fourth and what we call highest level of quality management verification, quality management system verification, is a global conformity assessment system like the ICRE. And that ICRE is the System for Renewable Energy, and it includes marine energy. And that is based on peer assessment. And so I will go through peer assessment in the ICRE in a few slides, but I hope this helps see that there are multiple levels at which you can implement a QMS. You have an in-house development where an organization ideally selects parts of a quality management standard to implement. You have the second level, which is a first-party application of those quality management standards, where they state compliance with the standard in its entirety. You have national accreditation, where a third party verifies compliance to the relevant standard. And you have the highest level where you join a global conformity assessment system, such as the ICRE, and you're subjected to what's known as peer assessment. So what is national accreditation? So in most countries, if not all, there are bodies that serve as accreditation bodies that will come and independently verify compliance to quality management standards. So in the United States, there are 2 bodies. For test laboratories, it is the American Association for Laboratory Accreditation, A2LA, and that who has accredited NLR for their ISO 17025 compliance. And for certification bodies in the United States, they are accredited by what's known as the ANSI National Accreditation Board, or ANAB, and they would come in and verify compliance to 17065. Now, internationally, for our guests, and I know there's at least one person from the UK on, there is the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, or UCAS, that provides accreditation services. And for our neighbors to the north, the Standards Council of Canada, SCC-CCN, provides accreditation services. And so in every single country, there are these national bodies that are independent third-party bodies that will come in and verify compliance to the quality management standards that your organization is implementing. And so that was meant to touch on that third level about national accreditation. And so now I'd like to touch on what I consider the fourth level, which is that highest level of using a global conformity assessment system. And for this community, which is marine energy, we are one of 3 sectors that participate within the IEC RE, where again, RE stands for renewable energy. The 3 sectors are wind energy, solar photovoltaic, and marine energy. And so bodies that wish to join have to go through a process called peer assessment. And as I've summarized here, peer assessment provides the highest assurance of quality within organizations. Now, peer assessment itself is based on one of those toolbox standards, 17040, which are the general requirements for peer assessment. The reason IECRE and global systems implement peer assessment is that national accreditation can vary widely from country to country. And I'm sure you'll laugh, but there are no standards for how national accreditation is done. So you have a standard that they accredit to, but there's no standard for how those accreditation bodies operate. And experience shows that accreditation bodies from country A to country B to country C can vary widely. And that leads to broad variations in quality from the organizations that are being accredited. And so to resolve that, the IEC has developed a suite of conformity assessment systems, one of which is the IECRE, and they use a pool of peers to assess each other. And I note here, either in the absence of national accreditation or to supplement national accreditation. And so a key pillar of these systems is that national accreditation is not mandatory. So I give an example. You have a certification body in country A and a certification body in country B. A new certification body in country C applies to join this system. And so the bodies in A and B would go to the body in country C and verify compliance with ISO IEC 17065 and in the particular state scope, which I mentioned previously. And so usually what you have is a lead assessor that manages the compliance with the ISO IEC 17065 aspects, while you have expert assessors that manage the aspects related to the specific technical standard that is in scope. And what this peer assessment enables is it ensures a baseline level of quality across all participants, because what it does is provide a standard by which all labs, all certification bodies, and all inspection bodies must meet. And that is the real value of these global conformity assessment systems like the IECRE. And now for those in the testing community, I give another example. We use the term round robin testing or proficiency testing. This is a similar, analogous external method for improving testing quality and consistent results across test laboratories. For those that aren't familiar with this terminology, what usually happens is either a common sample is sent to 10 labs or a common data set is sent to 10 labs. And those 10 labs are asked to test the sample according to a standard or analyze the results according to a standard. And those results are compared between the 10 laboratories that participated in this round robin or proficiency testing. And it's really a valuable exercise where differences in quality amongst the participating laboratories can be identified and improvements can be recommended based on a known answer before the data is sent to those individual labs that are participating in this test. So similarly, assessment enables, as I say, a baseline level of quality across participants in one of these global systems. So long-term big vision, IECRE, what are the benefits of the IECRE system, in particular marine industry? These systems reduce barriers to global market entry, which is enabled through mutual recognition of the products that are issued by participants in this system. Participating and getting certified under the system can improve insurability of technology and projects, which ultimately is enabled by this third-party verification of compliance to standards. Certificates in these test supports underpinning it, increased access to funding and project finance. Again, because the results are based on third-party verification against international. Ultimately, the reason all of this is done, quality management, standards, etc., is to reduce risk and increase confidence in the technologies being developed in our system and in our sector, and to grow trust in those technologies, those products, those services, or those projects. So that is why, in the long run, what we want is this sort of global conformity assessment system. And we'll touch on it. What we would really like is for TEAMER facilities in the long term to become a part of the ICRE system, such that the testing, certification, the inspections, the other expertise that TEAMER facilities offer can be accepted within this global conformity assessment system. So that a test lab testing a device in the US, those test results can be recognized globally, so that the applicant, aka developer, who had that testing conducted, does not have to retest their device in every single market that they enter. So my last slide before I think I open it up to Q&A was I promised to give an example from Streamwise Development. So that's my organization. I started it 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago. I am a single member LLC, so it's just me, myself, and I. And so the reason I mention that is that, again, quality management is not just for big organizations. It's not just for test labs. It's for all organizations, for all offerings and services. For me, at the moment, I utilize the in-house option. So I have taken parts of the relevant standards, quality management standards, and implemented them inside of Streamwise Development. I don't claim to be ISO 9001 compliant. I am not in compliance with every single clause of ISO 9001. However, I have implemented a quality management system, and I do maintain that quality management system. How to sign or have signed? How do I manage some contractors that I work with? And other things. And again, it's not all of ISO 9001, but I do have my own QMS, and I don't claim to be ISO 9001 compliant. In my work, I apply multiple standards, some from within TC 114, which are the marine energy standards, and other standards from outside of TC 114 in my day-to-day work. I give a couple examples. There's an IEC standard 60812 edition 3, which gives the guidance on failure modes and effects analysis, as well as failure modes, effects, and criticality analysis. Use that standard in all of the work I do on FMEA and FMICA. And I also utilize TC 114 standards in multiple aspects, including the 626-4, which is on technology education. I utilize the -2 on design. And so Streamwise is a number of international standards that I use with my clients, et cetera. So I don't focus on compliance with any of the 17,000 series, although I am versed in the contents of the 17,000 series. And then related, I am a recognized peer assessor within the ICRE system. I am an expert assessor, which means I go into the peer assessments and provide the technical assessment of the standards that are in scope under a 17025 or 17065 assessment. So I don't claim to be the expert in the 17,000 series, but I do provide expert assessments to peers in the system regarding the standards that are in scope for them. So I think most of you know, and I hope this helps to show, I take quality management and risk management very seriously within Streamwise Development. I'm quite involved in standards in my work, and I do work on peer assessment, verifying compliance with standards as a part of the ICRE system. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I see Mary has put some questions in. Hi, Mary. Nice to see you. I think we have plenty of time. I think you're the first question. I think there's about 30 minutes left in this webinar, so I'm literally right on time. I hope to finish this just about at, I guess that's 9 o'clock Madrid time, noon Pacific. So QMS systems seem like a long and expensive process to implement. How can organizations track ROI as they continue through each baby step of process improvement? That's a great question. I think tracking ROI can be challenging. I would argue that tracking things, rates of mistakes, errors, failures would be one way to track ROI. Tracking new business, tracking business leads, tracking efficiency could all be sort of metrics that you could use to track ROI. Tracking new customers, I think would be one. I know that part of the quality management process is customer engagement. And so if there were surveys that were issued to customers about their perspective on performance, I think you could easily track survey ratings. Do you see in your customers an increase in their perception of quality, their perception of value in the company? That would be one. A couple ideas there. The second question, do you have a marine energy specific example of how QMS processes improve the outcome of design or test? This one is much easier. So I appreciate that. As I think I mentioned, I know at the beginning, I started my career at Verdant Power, lead on the Roosevelt Island Tidal Energy Project. And during our FERC license, we hired EMEC, the European Marine Energy Center, to conduct a third-party verification of compliance to the Dash 200 standard power performance. We saw an incredible amount in our testing and the results of testing as a result of bringing in a third party to verify our compliance with the standard. Give one great example, or that was in the coding of our SCADA system or our supervisory control. Great, the data coming from the ADCP. I and the team had transposed the rows and columns of incoming data from the ADCP. Now, coincidentally, the matrix was square, so we thought we were implementing when in fact it was time and bins. So the data looked reasonable, but turned out it was wrong. And having EMEC as a third party look over our shoulder, one of their engineers caught that we were in fact transposing the matrix. And then instead of putting bins in the right place and time in the right place, we had them reversed. And I maybe don't quote me exactly on what data set it was, but we had them reversed. And so they came in and noticed that and said, look, Verdant, you have a mistake in your code and you need to transpose the elements of your matrix that guaranteed that we were in fact implementing the correct velocity signal into our SCADA system. And to be honest, without EMEC as an independent third party looking over our shoulder, I'm not sure we would have picked up that mistake because it didn't cause the system to crash. Because the matrix was square, it worked, the data was reasonable, but it was wrong. And so having EMEC as a third party, and at the time and now they are an accepted test lab within the IECRE system. And so the results they issued, the test report, are recognized globally because they are an IECRE test report. So not only did they find internal mistakes in our own coding, the product or deliverable of that test campaign is sort of the highest quality you can ask for. And so for Verdant and for myself at the time, it was an incredibly important aspect of the right project to have EMEC as a third-party independent test lab overseeing our work, both from a quality management perspective, but also from the value that was added by the test report being issued within the IECRE system. And what software programs exist that organizations can use to support their goals? That's a very interesting question. Never one to be afraid of saying I don't know. I hate to say I don't know. I would guess that there are quality management software tools that could be implemented. I know one that's related, but it's not software, is the NRL or the NLR risk management framework that's been published. I am a strong advocate for the NLR risk management framework for marine energy technologies. I have utilized it both at Verdant and in Streamwise Development. I know that is a tool that's incredibly valuable. It comes with a template for your risk register. It comes with a template for your FMEA and your FMICA analysis. And, that's a tool I would use. It's not a software. I'm happy to do some research afterwards, and there may be some others online that know even more than I do about quality management systems that could provide references, maybe in the chat, of softwares that could be implemented. But yeah, with apologies, Mary, I don't have a software program off the top of my tongue that I could offer. I apologize. And I just realized it was bins and beams. So we were transposing the bins and the beams of the ADCP. Yeah, so we found, and that was an important finding that EMEC delivered as a result of that implementation of a high-level quality management system. The last slide, and I'm obviously not going to force anyone to ask questions if they don't have it. I put together a wrap-up slide. I truly believe that the implementation of a quality management system at all TEAMER facilities will improve the quality and the reproducibility of the results, which is where the biggest value and benefit to the industry will come from. I hope today that I've been able to raise the awareness of quality management standards, such as the ISO 9000 series and the ISO IEC 17000 series within TEAMER facilities and the broader public. I would encourage all TEAMER facilities to review and consider enhancing their QMS, and then to apply international census-based standards, such as those published by TC 114, for example, whenever possible in their testing, inspection, certification, or other activities. I hope that I've encouraged and that TEAMER facilities will accept my recommendation to implement a quality management system within your organization if you don't have one. And so those would be my 4 takeaways. I hope I've given sufficient background that you believe me, or that you take me seriously when I make these sort of recommendations and wrap up comments. And yeah, I'm readily available. You can reach me at streamwisedev@gmail.com. My cell phone number's there. And yeah, I'll just reiterate my gratitude to TEAMER, to DOE, and to all of you for listening today. I hope you found what I had to say valuable, compelling, and clear. Maybe the last one is most important.
I see some typing happening.
I also see some rounds of applause. I appreciate that positive feedback. As I've said, I know that standards and certification are not usually what everybody's excited to talk about. And I appreciate people hanging around and hearing me out. And I hope that it was valuable and that people will consider how they implement quality management and take some of these lessons and find value from it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much. And I want to let everybody know that this will be posted on the TEAMER website under the webinars and workshops section. The recording will be, along with the slide deck. So if you would like to revisit the content, you can just visit the TEAMER website and be on the lookout there as well for upcoming events that will be posted in the near future.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Sam. Thanks to everyone at TEAMER and to the DOE for their support again, and to everybody for listening. I appreciate the opportunity to present on something I'm very passionate about, which I recognize maybe not everybody is. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Appreciate you, Sam. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.